This is how we've come to understand and experience love. Christ sacrificed his life for us. This is why we ought to live sacrificially for our fellow believers and not just be out for ourselves. If you see some brother or sister in need and have the means to do something about it, but turn a cold shoulder and do nothing, what happens to God's love? It disappears, and you've made it disappear. My dear children, let's not talk about love. Let's practice real love. This is the only way we'll know we're living truly and living in God's reality. It's also the way to shut down debilitating self-criticism, even when there's something to do about it. For God is greater than our worried hearts and knows more about us than we do ourselves. And friends, once that's taken care of and we're no longer accusing or condemning ourselves, we're bold and free before God. We're able to stretch our hands out and receive what we have asked for because we're doing what he said and doing what pleases him. Again, this is God's command, to believe in his personally named Son, Jesus Christ. He told us to love one another in line with the original command. As we keep his commands, we live deeply and surely in him, and he lives in us. And this is how we experience his deep and abiding presence in us by the Spirit.
Many years ago, I told you about a friend of mine named Arthur Rauner, who lives in Minneapolis. I met Arthur many years ago through actually my association with the Schuler Institute. Arthur and his wife began a place called the Pilgrim Center for Reconciliation. They did this in response to the Rwandan genocide in 1994. As we remember, the Hutus, the majority tribe of Rwanda at the time, carried out a mass murder of more than 800,000 members of the minority tribe, the Tutsis, while the world stood by, largely silent and uninvolved in this atrocity. Arthur and his wife left the comforts of their retirement, the security of their family and home, and moved to Rwanda to begin a ministry of reconciliation, bringing these members of these tribes together. They established the center and moved throughout the country over there, trying to find pastors who were both Hutus and Tutsis, inviting them to join them in the bush at a retreat they built for 3 days to see if they could bring about healing and reconciliation. Their life was at risk, but they pushed on. Over time, hundreds of pastors had their lives touched and transformed. They put a cross in the middle and then circled around. And everyone who looked across at their enemy had to look through the cross. A symbol of ultimate sacrificial love and reconciliation. He spoke about how Christ sacrificed his life for us, and so why we ought to live sacrificially for fellow believers. Hearts were transformed, relationships restored. Tens of thousands of people's lives were changed, and bloodshed was averted. One of the most powerful stories Arthur ever told me was the story of one Tutsi man who had his entire family murdered by the Hutus. This man knew the murderer. But instead of avenging the deaths of his family, as we might have thought he had entitlement to, he had read that Jesus said, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. And if he's naked, clothe him. So he did the radical thing of actually believing those words literally. So he fed him and his family. He clothed them. He welcomed him and his family into his home. And he said, from that day on, we lived as one family. One husband and father, mourning the loss of his family, embraces the one who caused that pain. When this man was asked how the Rounders had such an influence and impact on him, he said, these old white-haired white people showed up one day. They didn't lecture us. They came with their hearts. Our text today, we heard Pat read, "My dear children, let's not just talk about love. Let's practice real love, like the Rounders, this man." Now, most commentators and scholars believe that the 3 small letters of John tucked away near the end of the Bible are really a commentary on the Gospel of John for a new generation of Christians. And there are 2 great themes of the Gospel of John, and we heard them at the very end of the reading today. First, that Jesus Christ is the revelation of God and God's love, and that we should believe in him. And secondly, we should obey his command to love one another. That's all. Period. Jesus had said to them in John's Gospel, "A new commandment I give to you. Love one another as I have loved you." Now, the early primitive church that we read about early in the book of Acts seems to be a community or communities that practice that kind of Jesus kind of love. In Acts 4, you can read about it. It's a snapshot of the church. Early on, they were of one heart and mind. They shared everything they had. No one counted their possessions as their own. And there was no poverty among them. And every real need was met. But over time, something happened. The apostles passed away. And Jesus hadn't returned as they told him he would. And their persecution increased. And they were confused and they were anxious. And so they did what we would be tempted to do in such a state. That's stop trusting God and take control of things ourselves and seize the power in the vacuum and try to gain stability and security. And so they put personalities before principles. They put self-interest over Jesus' clear teachings. They broke into rival factions, deepening divisions and discord. And the original grace that we read in Acts 4, that was upon them all, was dissipated. And John feared for them. People began falling away from the church. And he knew their life was at peril and risk. Now, we need friends. One thing we need to do, all of us, is lose our rose-tinted glasses about the church. About a church clear in the sense of purpose and mission and unity and focused in action. We need to lose those lenses. Instead, recognize the church has always been full of flawed and selfish human beings just like us. Just like us. But John's hope in these short letters is to draw them back to the fundamental focus of their faith. The one and only overriding commandment that Jesus had ever given. Only one. Love one another as I love you. You know, many years ago when we attended, many people from this church attended the Robert Schuller Institute for Successful Church Leadership, and he was buried this past week. And we used to love to hear Juan Carlos Ortiz. Every morning he would do the devotional. I think we loved listening to his accent, right? He would say, actually, he's from Argentina. He's an Argentinian Pentecostal evangelist, pastor. We love that man. And he talked about going before his congregation one Sunday, and there were some problems in the church, some conflict and disagreement. And so he got up to preach, and he said this: love one another. And then he sat down. Well, they'd never heard a sermon that short from a Pentecostal preacher in their life. They waited, but nothing happened. Service went on and ended. Next Sunday they came back. He got up to preach. He said, love one another. And he sat down. Well, this one went on week after week after week, maybe for months. They were bewildered. They grew weary of his repetitious, brief message. And they say, Pastor, when are you going to preach on something else? And he said, when you love one another. That was a man of love. Right? And his son was dying of AIDS. He and his wife Martha had him sleep in their bed for 2 years between them. while they die. Well, this congregation that John oversaw in its drive and conflict to assert human leadership, to establish orthodoxy and often conflicting beliefs with each other, to be right and in control, had neglected the core of Jesus' life and mission. They would say, "What's love got to do with it?" And John said, "Everything. It's everything. It's the one and only theological principle that matters. It trumps everything else." We have had members over the years who have become disenchanted with things around here. It happens all the time, I know that. They've come to us wounded, addicted, broken in their lives and their relationships. And here they've found healing and transformation. And somewhere down the road, after all of that has been occurring, they begin to look at us differently. And they begin to attack us for what we teach. It's not enough. They want more meat. We're not orthodox enough. Whatever. And I say to them, "Is that what brought you here?" And never has one said, "No, yes." They said, "No. What brought you here?" "Our lives were broken and you loved us." I said, "No, that should count for something. Actually, it should count for everything," John would say. What's love got to do with it? When you can have proper biblical beliefs in your opinion and just live in your mind and have a relationship with Jesus, it means nothing if we don't love as he loved us. I always say those four folks that leave us, the reason they came here is the reason they leave. They leave, they come for love, and they leave because we're about love, unconditionally. Well, call me a heretic, call me a universalist, call me a liberal. I've been called worse. But I want to be a man who loves Jesus and takes this one and only, friends, explicit commandment to heart. That's it. And John says, Brown wonders, what must I first transmit to this struggling congregation? What must be foremost to their hearts and souls of these new believers? It was not the Trinitarian nature of God. It was not a comprehensive concept of sin and human nature. We don't see that. It wasn't a clear articulation of Jesus being fully divine yet human. That came a long time later. It wasn't a treatise on the atonement and salvation. That came much later. It was the commandment to love one another. And if we get that right, we get it all right over time. It's a verb, it's an action word, not a noun or a thing. It's the foundation of the Christian church. Every congregation, it's the cement that glues us together as a faith community. And I'm not even speaking here about loving those beyond us. I'm not negating it. But John is clear, this is about his church, the members of his church and community. Okay, what's love got to do with it? Secondly, what's love look like? That this love that John is talking about, how does it manifest itself? Well, I'd say this, it looks exactly like Jesus. That's exactly how it looks. And that's as complicated as you need to be, folks. John says, this is how we've come to understand and experience love. Christ sacrificed his life for us. This is why we ought to live sacrificially for our fellow believers and not just be out for ourselves. If you see some brother or sister in need and you have the means to do something about it, but you turn a cold shoulder and do nothing, what happens to God's love? It disappears. You make it disappear. Do you know we're the ones that can make that God's love disappear or appear? Some of us remember Tina Turner. Back in the 80s, she had a big hit. just love, but a second-hand emotion. That's the trouble with the way I think many of us in the church understand it. No, it has nothing to do with emotion. Often emotional love is a trap and a way of disengaging and being discretionary. It's expressive, it's a concrete action on behalf of others. Many of us heard that old joke about the husband and wife who've been married for like ever. And every morning they go through a ritual. She gets up early, makes breakfast. He comes down later, gets the paper off the front porch, sits down at the other end of the breakfast table and holds it up and reads it. And then when he's finished reading it, he puts it down, pats her on the head, gets his attache case and leaves her work. And this goes on every day for 25, 30 years. One morning he's sitting there doing the same old thing and she goes, "Do you still love me?" Doesn't even put the paper down. He just says, "For heaven's sakes, I told you the day we got married I loved you. If I change my mind, I'll let you know." Someone said when all is said about love, more is said than done. Now John in his community, he fought a new enemy that the other gospel writers didn't have to put up with, since his was the last of the gospels. He had Gnostic opponents in his church. Gnosticism was one of the first real threats to Christianity, infiltrating the church. It comes from the Greek word gnosis, which means knowledge. It was about them having, they thought, a secret wisdom that gave them power and advantage and understanding really who Jesus was and how you could find favor with him. There are many Gnostic cults around today, same idea. They love philosophical discussion. That's where they lived. They defined love in some philosophical term related to their hidden understanding of everything. And John cuts through their fancy language and concepts with a simple picture. This is how we've come to understand and experience love. Christ sacrificed his life for us. Period. Nothing else matters. If we want to know what love's got to do with it, and what love looks like, when we look at Jesus again in John's Gospel, he's the only one that has this story on Maundy Thursday in the upper room. See, John mentions love more than all the other Gospel writers almost together. Love is one of the major pillars of what he's writing about. Maundy Thursday, upper room. He's the only one who talks about it. Jesus gives them a new commandment. Mandatum means commandment in Latin. That's where we get Maundy from. It's all about the commandment to love as he's loved us. Before he spoke that commandment, he demonstrated it. I love the way he worked. He showed what it's like before he declared it. He demonstrated in action. He took off his outer garment. He got a basin and a water and towel, and he washed their feet. We remember that one. One of the lowliest and degrading roles for any servant, actually for a slave, only a slave, was washing feet. And in your degrading, you were honoring the one whose feet were washed, declaring them above yourself. I remember Peter protested when it came to his turn. He said, "Lord, you got it backwards." Of course he had it backwards. You washed the master's feet. And Jesus said to him, "Well, Peter, you don't understand what I'm doing, but you will. And if you don't let me wash your feet, I have no part in me." It means no part in what I'm about. You don't get it. And when he finished, they said, "You ought to wash one another's feet." That's what love looks like. And then he went even further, didn't he, to define exactly how he would sacrificially serve them and ultimately wash their feet. And wash the feet for all of us, sacrificing, laying down his life for us on the cross. Flesh broken, blood shed. It's not a theory of atonement. It's a declaration of what love looks like. Pure and simple. Jesus led by serving. It's the only type of leadership God has. Peter Metzger, a commentator, said this about the passage we're reading today. I like being called a servant leader until someone treats me like one. Can't you just give me a medal to wear? Like humility, right, Wayne? Take it away when you wear it. Now, when Jesus sacrificed his life, laid down his life, we know it led to death. It was about his death. And countless thousands or millions of followers over the centuries have been called upon to do the same. Most of us don't do well with martyrdom, I believe. But I don't think John is talking about these extreme moments of great sacrifice, but about laying down our life 100 times a day in the daily smaller giving for one another. It's an everyday commandment for ordinary Christians. And there are any number of ways, friends, in a daily flow of our lives that we can take a small step to lay down our life, to put another first in a moment. First, we need to answer the question for ourselves this morning. What's love got to do with us? What's this kind of love got to do with us as a congregation, personally, as Christ's body, especially in the way we treat and relate to one another when we gather? John said this, if you see some brother or sister in need, and you have the means to do something about it, but turn a cold shoulder and do nothing, what happens to God's love? It disappears, and you made it disappear. That's pretty serious. But think of this. Think of the myriad ways that to see, to pay attention to someone's need that we have in a few moments together. Every time we meet. Pews are full of needs. Pews are full of broken people. That's why Dr. Schuller said to me once, preach to broken people and you're never out of date. I want us to think about it, really. The ways to lay down your life for a moment or two with someone else, to lend an ear to someone who needs to share, to express some empathy for what they may be going through, to give an encouraging lift instead of a load, to maybe drive someone here to or from church on Sunday morning who needs a ride, or to an appointment during the week, to share a warm embrace briefly. Any one of these, and many, many more, endlessly, we can think of ourselves to do something when we're together as the body of Christ. John's point is not restricted to the emotional and spiritual care only, but the more expressive and concrete care. Poverty was rampant in John's church, as it was with most churches. And Christian love for John was very evident. You love with your means. You give up some of your goods. The goods we might think we need when we come up against someone who's truly needy. It's living out what we say. Living out what we say. I call it economic sharing. Economic sharing. I read some time ago about a church in Eugene, Oregon called Church of the Servant King. I love it. You know what? They can truly wear that title. Because they have one rule in their church, that's this, that no one in their membership will be in need, period. They will never ignore members' basic needs. And they've yet to encounter a single situation they couldn't meet. Isn't that amazing? They will not let anyone go without food, medical treatment. They will not let children in school go without school supplies if they need to purchase them. And the pastor of that church says that transformed our congregation. It freed us in surprising ways. So our common life became fun and exciting and imaginative. I wonder, what's that kind of love got to do with us? One day our staff at our meeting were talking about the economic downturn, people being laid off, people going through grief, or someone's in the hospital for a long period, and what it means to take a home-cooked meal to them. We thought of many cases in our own congregation of neediness, people living on fixed incomes at this time. Those shut in. We said, what if we started a food pantry? Now we have a food bank and we want to support that. But that's not here. But this might say charity begins at home, in the practical, concrete caring and loving and laying down lives. You might think about that. What if we started a food pantry for people within our own membership who are definitely in need today? What other ideas could we come up with? So what's love got to do with it, sisters and brothers? Love is the impetus. Love is the driving force in achieving the unimaginable. Brings us a closer relationship to our Creator, the Creator of all things. That's the compelling force that says, through mercy and the grace of God, we're truly capable of extending the same to one another. And a pastor in the 18th century wrote this as I close. Love for our neighbor consists of three things: to desire the greater good of everyone, to do what good we can when we can, to bear, to excuse, and to hide others' faults. The kind of love that Jesus is talking about is the sacrificial love of the cross, not the superficial love of the world. Let's pray. Loving God, what's love got to do with it? I'm afraid it's more than we sometimes acknowledge. In our busyness, in our need to care for ourselves, in our carelessness to observe a need in another's life, and if we have any means of helping to do that. But that is how tangible and real love is. We're to love one another as you have loved us. And you said that to your disciples. You didn't say that to anyone else. Love one another. Those you were leaving behind, you worried about them. They would be unified. They would find purpose and mission and take action in your love. And we need this as a congregation, Lord. I think we need a new birthing, a new charism of your grace. We need to be these people that can't wait to find ways of just reaching out to help someone, to discover a need someone has and says, do you have any benevolent funds left? I have a person I think might benefit from something. Or to come up with a means ourselves. And to know as we do that, we are laying down our life. We are putting one above us. Lord Jesus, Lord, you became a doormat. When you washed the disciples' feet and died upon the cross, you made yourself lower than the lowest, someone to be walked upon and mistreated. And you did that, Lord, for one purpose, because you loved us infinitely and unconditionally, and you wanted to roll out the red carpet so we could walk upon that. That's what you did. Help us to be people that are willing to do the same. And then we can rightly call ourselves Christians, which means little Christs. We seek to be that for your honor and glory and the extension of your kingdom.